Peace and greetings to you. This is Emunah Yisrael, affectionately known as the First Lady of Debate Talk for you. I have enjoyed coming to you week after week, season after season, growing together, speaking about the difficult topics, investing the energy, time, and effort with our brothers and sisters on the panel. Today, I would like to come to you with an opportunity for you to invest in something that I've been working on and that's near and dear to me. It's called the Yummy Cottage. You can learn more about it at www.gofundme.com/the Yummy Cottage. We're currently fundraising so that we can get it off the ground, and your help would be appreciated. Once again, www.gofundme.com/the Yummy Cottage. Check the link in the box and hope to hear from you soon.
Brother B.A. Ben Abraham, and I'm your host of the Man Up segment on Debate Talk for You platform. The objective is for all brothers from different walks of life to come together, link up, and build on matters concerning all various stages of life. If anyone would like to reach out on concepts and ideas, you can reach Brother B.A. at radicalrhyme1984@gmail.com. Again, radicalrhyme1984@gmail.com. Tap in. Let's build. Shalom. Shalom.
What I was going to say is that before any subject matter can be discussed, the most important thing in order to understand that people are on the same page is to define terms. Defining terms is very, very important, and that's something that we've lost in regards to our communication with one another, is defining terms. So if we're going to talk about a subject matter in regards to polygamy, polygamy is a broad umbrella that has subcategories that fall underneath it. But to get some basic definition of polygamy, the word polygamy itself is the syntax of two words, poly and gamy. So you have poly meaning multi, gamy means the spouse, all right? So you have the conditional practice of having more than one spouse at one time, also called a plural marriage. That is the simplest definition, even though there are some intricacies that can be, added to that. But in its most basic form, polygamy itself is a broad term that means a condition or practice of having more than one spouse at one time, also called a plural marriage. Then we're going to jump into the next term. There's three other words that we need to define to fully understand this, because going forward, this will set the tone and give us the momentum to pretty much address the various points that we'll address on the call on tonight. The second definition is polygyny. Poly, again, meaning multiple, G-Y-N. Most women know what a G-Y-N is. That refers to women. So it means the practice or condition of having more than one wife at one time. Okay? That's polygyny or polygyny. Okay? It's different from polygamy. Polygamy is the broad umbrella, and these are the subcategories. The next one is polyandry or polydry. And this is poly, which means multi. Andry comes from the Greek word andros, which means man. So it means the condition or practice of one wife having more than one husband. That also is very, very important. So typically most people may be aware of the first one. I think everybody's aware of the first one. The second one would be like number two in awareness. The third one would be the third one that most people are aware of. And some people didn't even know that that's a practice. It's very minor in the world today, but it's still being practiced in a very few amount of societies. But the last term is very, very important. The last term is polyamory, okay, or polymery. And that has the word poly in it, which means multi, and the word amor in it, which we know means love. So that is the practice, desire, or acceptance of intimate relationships that are not exclusive with respect to the other sexual or intimate relationships with knowledge and consent of everyone involved. A lot of times when we talk about polygamy, a lot of times people do not properly define this particular word because it is distinct from the other two that I mentioned, which is polygyny and polyandry, okay? So polyamory is something that is very important. A lot of people are not familiar with that term. So this is different than the other two because this one does not involve a distinct commitment, a contractual agreement in regards to the intimate relationships and practice and desire or acceptance of relationships with those of other parties when everybody involved has no exclusive ties to the other, okay? So this is something a lot of times that are practiced with people who are not married, who are kind of promiscuous or who are out there, interfacing with other people. So this one does not fall in the other two categories because the other two categories fall under the traditional Orthodox definition of a marriage, Okay, so those are the four major terms that we have to understand, because during the course of this conversation, as we're bringing up points, as we're making statements, we have to ensure that the listening audience and the people at large can understand that these terms are very important, very distinct, and that everything that we talk about will fall into one of these categories.
Yeah, once again, it's Debate Talk for you. If you have any questions or comments, you know that number, 646-716-7320. I see we have a lot of people on social media that's making comments and sharing it on their personal page. We appreciate you creating awareness on social media, Debate Talk for you radio. But Emunah Israel, you have a YouTube page, and I see that you have a video or two on this particular topic, polygamy. Let the people know what's your... what do you feel about the whole move polygamy and what it's all about? What do you feel about that? And break it down. Okay.
Kane, as you said, definitely it took me some time to study this topic from all directions. And the reason I took this approach, because oftentimes when women in this nation speak up, they often labeled emotional and dismissed. And for this reason, over the last almost decade, I've been looking at this topic from all angles: spiritual, mental, physical, emotional, and historical as well. The video in which you referenced to that's on the YouTube was just basically a straight talk video to our people, those who already know what is going on, because we have perfection, we have the concept, the ideology, and then we have the reality. So that video was speaking to the reality of those who would know what they're currently experiencing. And the question I asked in that video is nation building or just making a plain mess? And this comes from experience. Like I said, this comes from seeing what other people are going through. This comes from hearing other people's story and seeing the effect that it's having on our nation, as well as the perception of others as they view our nation. So basically that's what that video was about. I had major feedback on the video, men and women, older and younger, agreeing, coming out of, so to say, the closet to share their experiences, not to say that it cannot work, but to turn a blind eye that the reality is that broken people are endeavoring to go into a very complicated relationship structure, and from there pushing it back to the masses to say that it's working. And the reality is the numbers are showing, the statistics are showing that it's not working. And so that video was just to open up a conversation, and I guess that's why I'm here tonight. So definitely I look forward to this conversation.
Right, and well, a lot of people, they say that the Bible at one point, particularly, Old Testament, had a lot of polygamy going on, things of that nature. Emunah, what do you feel about now? Do you feel like polygamy will work at this time and period today? Do you feel like it's a working system in progress today? Yeah.
Okay, so before I can talk about today, I'm going to have to reference a bit about the past, because history has a way of repeating itself. And when we look at polygyny, as the brother Divine Prospect pointed out, this was the practice of a man having multiple spouses. When we look at it in the context of the Torah, and we look not only at the fact that it happened, but we look at the emotional, psychological, and physical effects that it had on the nation, we could see that at that point it was problematic. So fast forward into today, where the land that they had, we do not have, the possessions that they have, we do not have, and all of the social economic things that were in place that they had that we do not have. How did it prove problematic in that time, yet work in this time, when our situation has been exasperated to the umpteenth power? And so to answer your question, I see that from the Torah till now it was problematic and still continues to be so, because of the way in which it is being approached, and just the things that have to happen, and all of the things that have to happen in order for it to work. And more often than not, these things are not in place, and we're electing people, and I'll go into that in a little bit later, but we're missing major players in this whole scheme of things, and yet still loosely calling it polygyny, when in reality it's something else. But I'll just leave it at that, and hopefully that answered the question.
And I see we got people pressing number 1 already. We're going to get to you guys once again, stand by.
They get ready to bounce.
Yeah, you know how that goes. But Yeah, let's let LaRon Divine Prospect, what you heard so far. You want to respond to what she said? You can go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm going to respond to you said because I think this is just a response. So,
and you know what? And feel free to dialogue with each other too. You can dialogue with each other as well. For that.
Oh, okay, cool, no problem. What I was going to say is that I had some information that I wanted to put out, but I'll save it as we progress throughout the conversation. But to respond to your question, I would say it's kind of complementary to what the sister was saying. In regards to polygamy and in the subcategory polygyny in regards to the scriptures, there were times and periods where that practice was necessary, depending on the social climate, the political conditions, the economic interests, and health. You know what I'm saying? All of these different things were responsible in regards to who was obligated to have these type of relationships. The most important thing is before the conversation of polygamy is even discussed, you have to first be able to understand what are the rules and regulations of a relationship. Because if that is not properly defined, if that's not properly understood, and that's not properly applied, then it doesn't matter if you're in a monogamous relationship or a polygamous relationship, it's not going to work. So you have to be able to assess, okay, what are the rules, regulations, what are the guidelines, what are the requirements, what are my obligations, okay, and then you have to have overseers, okay. Everybody has to be accountable to somebody else, and just as we're accountable to the Most High, we got to be accountable to His people as well. And I think that the most important thing is that when you have somebody who can rightly be appointed to be able to oversee certain matters in regards to relationship and be able to give counseling, because a lot of people that jump into these things, they don't get the proper counseling. You'll be able to see that there's things that we can perfect in regards to this particular practice in the past and employ it only in circumstances, situations, and environments where it's conducive for the necessary growth and sustainment of a particular populace of people. Now, to jump or to complement a little bit more on that, I would say that you have to be able to assess where this is happening in the scheme of history, where this is happening in the scheme of geography, where this is happening in the scheme of culture. And every time I speak on this particular subject matter, I stress and emphasize the term culture. Culture is what is agreed upon by a particular ethnic group of people in order for them to create safeguards to protect the people who are agreeing upon the things of a particular constitution that enforces customs, traditions, rites of passage, resources, etc. So culture is a defining mark that encompasses everything that a particular ethnic group of people can agree to, can abide by, and can employ in their everyday life. We have to be able to identify culture. Culture is defined by a particular worldview of a particular class or ethnic group of people. Okay, so when we talk about the term polygamy, we have to look at culture, and we have to look at the evolution of culture throughout the years, throughout the centuries. We have to look at culture as it changes per region in the world, geography speaking. We have to be able to look at culture in regards to worldview. We have to look at culture for its pros and its cons, etc. And I think the most important thing is that we must define what the Hebrew Israelite culture is, and we also must define what is the general indigenous culture of people. And once we're able to identify what the culture is, now we can introspectively look at it and define the specifics of what allows that culture to thrive and for it to tick based on the rules and regulations that are set out and the people's general consensus on how they agree upon how they're going to employ it. So ultimately, the term or the subject matter in regards to polygamy, it varies. It varies from situation to situation. It varies from culture to culture. It varies from geographic location to geographic location, and it varies from period of time, one dispensation to another dispensation. But ultimately, we have to first understand the basics, the rudimentary basics of a proper, healthy, functional, thriving relationship, its obligations, its requirements, and once we have that laid out, then anything else can be built upon that and can be do so righteously.
Now, there are people out there that say when it comes to polygamy, polygyny, etc., that it's according to the law of the land. So as far as doing it in America, some people would say that you can't do it in America, but in other places. What do you feel about that, Ron Divine Prospect? Okay.
Well, I would say that you'd have to define what culture you're allowed to employ wherever you live. Okay, so if I'm a practicing Hebrew Israelite and I go to a Muslim country that has Sharia law and I try to openly practice my Hebrew Israelite ideology, I will come under scrutiny. I will come under some form of punishment. I will come under some form of hate. I will come under some form of scrutiny. I will come under some form of ostracization because of my particular disposition, right, based on my culture. So I would say that it depends on the society and what the society's dictates are on how the citizens. A citizen is somebody that has a contractual obligation to that particular nation, state, or body politic of people. So if you are a Hebrew Israelite and you are also a U.S. citizen, you have to have obligations to either or to both, or you're going to uphold one more than the other. Now, the problem with that is that if you decide to say, hey, you know what, my cultural disposition, that I have a historical continuity, comes from a particular group of people in the past who I'm in the descendancy of, and this is one of the cultural precepts that is employed and practiced by it. But here in America, there's the so-called laws of the land, and I'm a citizen, which means I'm showing tribute to a nation or authority and giving jurisdiction or allowing jurisdiction of another entity to preside over my matters, then I have to be in alignment with the so-called laws of the land. But if I'm able to have a format where I can distinctly make a proclamation or a declaration to get this nation to identify the fact that I have the right and entitlement to the historical continuity of the practices of my ancient ancestors, who I'm the lineage and descendancy from, and one of the precepts of that is so-called polygamy, and I'm able to employ it in a way where I'm not making anybody into a slave, where I'm not abusing anybody, where I'm not harming anybody, then I should be allowed, based on the appeals that I make to either international law or federal law that has the stipulations that will allow me to safeguard and protect whatever it is that I practice. If we do not make that declaration on our proclamation and we don't have that on paper that has been agreed upon by the authority that is above us, then we're going to have a lot of difficulty in properly employing this system in reality, because we have to look at the benefits of a relationship or a marriage when a person is going to work. You know, if I'm married and I'm going to work and I go to sign on all the paperwork that I need for taxes and so forth, and I add my wife to that piece of paper, right? Now my wife is entitled to the benefits that I'm receiving for working at that job. Now, let's say that wife that I have, or that so-called wife that I have, I only got a ketubah, or only got a marriage certificate between me and her that has not been acknowledged by the state. If I'm working for this entity that I'm a citizen of and I'm receiving income or pay, and now I'm trying to get my wife to become part of the benefits that I'm taking in, the problem with that is going to be is that how is that recognized by the state? The state has to be able to recognize that so-called ketubah or that marriage certificate that you're making between you and your wife. So unless you have a declaration in order for you to be able to safeguard the culture that you are employing based on the historical continuity of your ancestry lineage that you have a connection to, and one of those cultural precepts is practicing polygamy or practicing a form of marriage that's contained within that cultural capsule, unless you have it proclaimed and declared and authorized and received and certified, you're going to have a lot of difficulty in reality living in a society where you are fully integrated in and trying to get or pass on benefits or inheritance onto your children, your wives, etc. So ultimately, in America, from a particular perspective of being reasonable, the only way that you can fully employ this particular practice and have the legal jurisdiction to preside over it and be able to dictate how it's done, how it's formulated, etc., you must own your own land, you must have your own property, and you must be recognized as being an individual of indigenous status that is allowed to practice this, and therefore you will have the necessary protections in order for you to pass on inheritance, in order for you to openly practice this without it being infringed upon by the state, by the federal government, or internationally.
Now, what about you, Emunah Israel? What do you feel about the practice of polygamy in the United States?
Kane, Brother Devon just said a lot of information that some listening they may not have or possibly really know how it translates. So I'm doing a Emunah translation. Translation, you have a whole lot of women that after or if anything happens to you has no rights, point blank. Part of marriage is to make sure that you are secure in a level of that commitment and relationship, and that your children are secure, because a wise man leaves an inheritance for his children's children, as it speaks about in the book of Proverbs. And what you run into is what he was speaking about, is that the reality is, and this has happened to many people, because we're not the first generation who have woke up here. And we have those 40 years, 50 years, 60 years on record, so that we have a wealth of information that we can tap real time of how it really goes down. If it is that you cannot go up to anything, you have no right, you cannot go to the hospital, you cannot go to the bank and say, hey, I was his third Isha. It doesn't translate. And so what we do is end up putting a lot of time, energy, and effort into these relationship investments, and especially if we have no governing faction, which a lot of times we do not. So when problems arise and there's no officials to go to, then there's a lot of injustice going on. So what I feel about it here is we're talking about, like I said earlier, a social, economic, and political structure that does not exist. There are no judges to go to. So it's like trying to live on the edge and then cry when we do not have measures in place to deal with these issues that are going to arise. You understand what I'm saying? Another thing that I wanted to speak about of what is being done here as I looked at this polygyny around the world, what is being done, especially in those who are waking up in the truth, let's just say consciousness, quote unquote, is that a whole portion of what was supposed to be done is not being done for the large majority of the people. It's easy to say that we're acquiring all of these women or wives when you actually don't go through the proper channels to get them. How many people could say, yeah, man, I got like 10 cars, I got 5 cars. When you actually have to work and prove that you can support and sustain someone and the family of which you're going to produce, the conversation will begin to dwindle. But what I find here in the Americas is that, like I said, a key component is mixing, and this is on books. When we look at the Torah, we see someone who's elusive here. The men are taking women, and the women are also volunteering because of their condition to go into a level of concubinage. And Emunah, yes, I said it. It's a level of concubinage because you only have a minimal amount of rights. So it is a level of concubinage and / housemaid or ama. And so I hear a lot of people saying, oh, yeah, so because they can help me with the children. And I'm saying to myself, if we're really going to get real Torah, because I'm a little bit tired, so I'm going to just get real right now. If we're going to go real Torah talks about handmaidens and manservants. And this is where we see that when we see polygyny come into the picture, the person was of substantial wealth to be able to afford it. And he wouldn't get another wife to come and help you with your children, just like Laban gave Bilhah and Zilpah to his daughters, and just like Rebecca left with Deborah, you would have your own personal assistant who's going to help you govern your household. And like it says in the Proverbs, a wise woman builds up her house. But that's not what's happening. So in America, we're doing a pseudo-type, calling it polygyny or calling it polygamous relationships, and conveniently having amnesia on the reality of this is not what it looked like. And you could not just go and take up someone's daughter and say, you're going to be my X, Y, and Z. It didn't work like that. But today, because all of the safeguards are out of place, this is what is happening, and this, I think, is what is contributing to the mess that we see before us. So to answer your question, and to bundle it all back up now, the rights are not there, as the brother was speaking about. You're going to have a very difficult time. When it comes on to righteous judgment, you're going to have a very difficult time. And if anything goes down, you're basically at square one again. 50-year-olds and 50-year-old women having to start all over because they had no protective mechanisms for themselves or for their children. So my question is, if it is for the children, if it is for nation building and wealth building, where are the parameters that are going to guarantee that these children don't have to start from scratch all over again? I hope that was not too wrong.
That's a good question. Ron Devon Prospect, want to tackle that?
What was the question?
You can repeat.
The question was, in the end of the day, if this is for the children, if this is for nation building, as it is said often in the nation, and there are no legal rights for a second, third, fourth, or 20th child, then where are the parameters that are protecting these children that so many people are procreating? What is going to protect them or make sure that they get their inheritance, like so many people like to read? You know, if he has 2 wives in the first, oftentimes these children have no inheritance. You understand what I'm saying? So where are those things, and where are those safeguards? Where are those things that the children could actually look to get justice and to get righteousness in this space and time that we're in this diaspora?
Okay, so I guess I'll answer that. That's an interesting question because the only way to really answer that question is that you'd actually have to have a body politic set up. So if I have a particular congregation, a Hebrew Israelite congregation, then I would have to have a body politic. The body politic is going to define how everything is being governed within this particular congregation. First and foremost, the Torah has to be the solid foundation or the constitution that everybody has to agree to. You know, one person can't say, well, I don't agree with this part. Somebody can't say, well, I don't agree with that part. No. In order for this body politic to operate, the charter, which is the constitution, which is the Torah, which is laid out explicitly on how everything is supposed to be ruled, everything is supposed to be governed in regards to that particular congregation. So you can have a mini common unity or community where you have these parameters that are that's set up to safeguard, to ensure that people are following Torah in that particular body politic organization, also known or AKA as a Hebrew Israelite congregation. So, number one, you'd have to have something set up in regards to contractual agreements. People have to be very aware of what contract is. And I think the problem is that people just get a copy of a contract and get it signed and say, okay, you know what, this is what it is, but don't fully understand the covenant aspect of a contract. Okay, covenant aspect is something that's conditional, meaning that it has to be conditional for both the man, it has to be conditional for both the woman. Because what I was going to go in earlier is when we deal with, for example, something such as Exodus 21, where we're talking about a so-called female servant, if she's being sold to a man, if the man does not win favor with her, meaning that if he does not want to take as his wife, he has to allow her to be let go. And I know in a lot of situations that the women feel like they're prisoners and they're being held against their will, and there is no counsel, regulatory counsel, for them to appeal to in the event that some injustice is being done to her. So they would have to have that counsel employed in that body politic, so that way there's a regulatory board that presides over these contracts, the stipulations of these contracts, and be able to say, hey, okay, based on evidence A, B, and C, we're able to say, you know what, in this case, this woman needs to be let go because she's being mistreated, she's being harmed, her children's not receiving inheritance, she's being treated loosely as a concubine, etc. So you'd have to have that regulatory board or that council within your body politic, within your congregation, because if you don't have anybody overseeing this and doing so from a contractual, covenantal agreement and looking at the criminal punishments for not abiding by such, then people will do whatever they want to do because there is no accountability. There is no punishment for injustice. So we have to be able to set these things up and have these obligations set forth. Also, we're going to do it traditionally. You should have a period of courtship, a period of contract, a period of consummation, a period of celebration. You have to have some kind of rites of passage in regards to how a marriage is. Also, the text also tells us very specifically in Deuteronomy chapter 24 that when a man gets a wife, he has to use 1 year to please that wife. He has to please her and make her happy for 1 year. So meaning that within that 1 year's time, to ensure that that relationship is fruitful and thriving enough for it to encounter any other options, that 1 year is the basis after the marriage is complete to ensure whether or not that man is doing his duty to please that woman. And you need to have a counsel to overlook to ensure that that woman is being successfully pleased. That is very important because, again, this falls in line with Torah. Again, you also have to have a system where dowry is being paid, because if you have a congregation, let's say, and you have your own land, which is a few congregations that actually do that, inheritance has to be given to each woman. A man can't marry 4, 3, 5, 10 women and decide, okay, you know what, I like this woman, I don't like that one, so this person is going to get this person is going to get that. He should not have that authority to decide that, because the Torah already set out you can't love one and hate the other, and just because you hate the second or third or fourth, or you hate the first, etc., you cannot feel that you have the liberty to dispense inheritance as you see fit. No, each person who you're married to is entitled to an equal amount of inheritance. And if you cannot provide that inheritance for that woman, then you do not need to take on additional women. Another issue that I've found out is that a lot of times nobody's able to look over these relationships and ensure that the women are not being pimped, okay? Because you'll have people that say, hey, you know, the reason why I'm going to get these wives is because we're going to have additional income in the home, right? Meaning that you don't give the woman the position to be able to volunteer to say, you know what, I want to work and get a job to bring in income, or I want to stay at home and take care of the kids, take care of the home, or run a family business, which I stress all the time whenever I talk about this subject matter. The man should have a family business, and within that family business, he should be able to delegate a particular role to whoever is his wife or wife that is in the home, so that way he can sustain everything that's going on within a home and provide for every reality that that woman and those children will encounter. This is very important because now men are just getting women because they want to bring additional incomes into the home, and there's nothing that's there in Torah that says that a woman should be sent out to work and bring in income and bring it back into the home. It doesn't say that. So that means that if that's not explicit there, it's up for optional purposes, but somebody needs to preside over it to ensure that this is being done right in each and every household. But again, if a person does not understand the fundamentals of a functional relationship, then anything else they do outside of that or stemming from that will be dysfunctional as well. So again, everything has to be set in place, and if anybody's getting involved with these type of systems, any woman for that matter is getting involved in these type of systems, it can be done righteously, because I know several cases where it is, but it has to be done where somebody's able to regulate and to ensure that everything's being carried out properly. Because if that is not done and if that is not established and there's no counsel and nobody preside or judge, no regulatory board, there's no charter, if these things are not in place, then injustices is going to go abound. People, most of the time, the women will keep to themselves and not really say nothing because they will be in fear of speaking up, okay? Because we have an incident where the Israelites was in the wilderness and there was a situation where the women who there was no son, they had an inheritance, and they spoke up to receive this inheritance, okay? Men may have said, oh, shut up, y'all don't know what you're talking about, y'all don't need to receive nothing, but because their cries went up so loud, they changed the game, and now the Most High, through Moses, had to create an additional modification to appeal to that precise matter. But the women spoke up. They were not out of order, but they spoke up because an injustice was being done. And as an obligation to all of Israel, whenever there's injustice being done, we need to speak up. So hopefully, sister, I kind of roughly answered that question for you, but the most important thing is that there has to be an organized body politic that has regulatory boards, that has charters, that has criminal punishments for people who do not abide properly in regards to the matter of contractual agreements, which more importantly has the necessities of a covenant agreement, so that way you understand that it's conditional and that there's penalties if you don't abide by it. And if this is not being enforced, then I don't believe that a lot of these polygamous marriages or relationships is even valid in the first place. So I believe that needs to be in line. And if that is in line, then I believe that's a working model to start with in the event that a man has to take additional women, number one, to ensure that she is protected, she's getting inheritance, her children's getting inheritance, and that she is being treated right. Because if a woman is left out there and she's not married, she may not be treated properly within the community. Or if a woman is barren and she's looked down upon a community, a man should be able to take her in and still supply resources to her and also provide her with children, whether that's through adoption, whether that if you have additional children in a home, one can be assigned to her. It has to be done practically and has to have a regulatory board to enforce and to ensure that everything is done properly, because if not, you're going to have injustice in the bound. And if you try to go outside of that community and cry for injustice, the relationship is not going to be valid anyway, because it has not been recognized by the state or federal government.
All right, Emunah, you can reply or make a comment before we go to the callers. You can go ahead.
Yeah. All of what the brother is saying is correct in the sense that this stuff has been done. There's one community in particular that we can look at. But I tend to look at what we're saying in light of what has been done and the reality of the people who we're dealing with. And I'm not saying everyone, but the reality for me from where I stand is that we are a people who have been damaged to the very core of who we are. You understand? And before we can relate to however many people are trying to relate to, we can't even relate to ourselves, real talk. And
and relate to another one or your counterpart, whether it be you or male to a female, female to a male. And like he's saying, unless we can first deal there in the damage that we have done because of our disobedience and that has been done onto us, and relate to the Creator, because our external government is going to only, because it has been done in Demona, for instance, and there's much information that has come out of Demona in this time, that this system was one that was pushed, and these regulatories were absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so what I'm saying is, if we have a corrupt body of people in mind, spirit, and heart, and we're going to put power into their hands we're going to have, that's what the Most High said, talks about unjust weights and balances, and talks about partiality and judgment, because history, recent history and ancient history, has bore out that the system is easily corruptible because the people themselves are corrupt. And so what we have sometimes is, like I said, corrupt leaders trying to govern the lives of others who are now become corrupted. And so for me, I like to keep it like 100% real of the reality that in the midst of all of this, we have children who are being procreated. In the midst of all of this, we have lives that are falling off into the balance. And it's not only just in Israelite culture, because I took time to look at the Islam culture. I also took time to look at the Mormons, and I saw the same thing happening, that in these complex relationship styles, where it is that people are trying to govern their own ego or their own nakash, and they're trying not to deal with the anger and the jealousy. They're suppressing their own function, which is another topic of when we put many women on top of one another in the sense of all of them vying for this one position. It suppresses your function to a certain degree, and you're not able to be that helpmeet or that Azer Kenibdo that the Most High said in Genesis. So we have deviated far from the original plan, and by doing so, we have to put in these prosthetic type parameters to govern the relationship. Lastly, before you go to the cause, I would also like to say that relationship or a marriage are between families. And just because we're waking up, that doesn't exclude that the person is coming from an entire body of people. And when you marry one person to another person, you are married families. When you look in Africa, it's not individual. We like to talk about the European. That's a different concept. We're marrying families. So when we're marrying all of these people together on these pseudo-type relationships, again, we're not looking at the entire spectrum unless we're going to pluck the people out and make the family only be those who believe like you do. And now the child no longer has a paternal or maternal grandmother. You understand what I'm saying? And it gets real sticky and complicated when you go into these areas. So I say that my concern has been and continues to be the offspring. When we look in the book of Ezra, we had an entire strange relationship marriage thing going on where they had to go through and be like, what is all of this? Because it really became a mess. And the children of these are often confused. Not to say that children of monogamous relationships are not, but it is that sometimes the emotional needs with all 10, 12, 15 children. I have 4 children. You understand what I'm saying? The emotional needs is not just to provide food, for clothes, and shelter, because we need to raise a generation that is not going to turn away from the Creator. So we need to raise righteous and upright children. In order to do that, we need to be present. But if we're not present because we have to go out and work all day long, then we're defeating the purpose. You understand what I'm saying? So sometimes it's not the quality, it's not the quantity of children that we're having. It's the quality of children that we're having that's going to stay in this way and not depart. So with that, I'm going to turn down a little bit, and I'll put it back over to you, Brother Showtime.
All right, people, I know you're enjoying this show. I see people making their comments on social media. We're going to go to the phone lines now, and all you got to do, once again, is dial that number, or, if you're on social media or you're listening on Blog Talk, dial that number 646-716-7320 if you want to chime in, if you have any questions or comments, or you just want to share what you feel about polygamy. Once again, the number is 646-716-7320, and press number 1, and then we can add you in the conversation. But let's go to the phone lines right now. Let's see what you guys got to say. Let's go to 314-680. You're live on air.
Yeah. Hey, Sal, can you come back to me in about 5 minutes, man? Because I got something to say, but I'm at line buying some stuff right now. This is Lorraine.
Oh, Lorraine? Okay, what's going on, brother? I'm going to put you on hold, I guess. I got you. I'll get back to you. Let's go to the next phone line. Let's go to 832-610. You're live on air. 832-610. Live on air. 832, can you hear me? Oh, sound like you knocked out. Huh? Okay. Let's go to the next line. Let's go to 832-322. You're live on Debate Talk Radio. 832-322. Can you hear me? Hello? All right, guys. Once again, guys, if you want to ask a question, you got to press number 1. If you don't, you got to press number 1 again to take you off the switchboard. But once again, want to hear from the people out there. If you listen on Skype, just press number 1, and we'll add you in the conversation. Again, it's polygamy. What's wrong with that? I want to hear your perspective. As far as Ron DePon Prosper, as far as ladies, and do you find that there's more women that want to get involved in polygamy or more men, and why? What's the reason? What do you think the reasons why? Put it out there. What the reasons might be.
That's a great question. From my research and from my interface with various congregations and me teaching workshops and building with the people there to help ensure that there's proper structure within their congregation, I would say that it varies. I think that most of the women who get involved in it, they get involved because it is being told to them that this is natural, number 1. Number 2, it is a requirement. And number 3, if they do not accept it or allow it, then they are going against the Most High's will. So I would say in a lot of case scenarios, a lot of the women who get involved for those reasons. But there are a handful of them that actually get involved voluntarily because they see the benefits of having a polygynous relationship or polygynous marriage. And in regards to the men, I think a lot of the men who get involved, it would vary. I think a lot of them who get involved for the wrong reasons. They look at it as multiple sources of income, which is not the first thing you should think about when getting into a polygamous marriage. So off the back, if somebody is looking at it in that format, I believe that they need to reevaluate what their agenda is for having that type of relationship. Number 2, I think that some men do it to have variety in expressing their lust in regards to sex. And again, if that is something that somebody has in mind to do, that is going to do nothing but denigrate not just the women, but also that man's relationship with the Most High. Okay? So I think a lot of them be a lust, a lot of them be a desire for additional income. And I think also bragging rights, some men do it for. And, and the bragging rights because they are allowed to do it, or they're being told they're allowed, more so than they are told of the requirements, the obligations, and the penalties. So those things are typically not enforced in a lot of communities that have these polygamous relationships. They're not being told these things. All right, they're just told that there's an allowance that's there, and you're allowed to do it. So if you're allowed to do it, this is how you go about it. But they're never told about the penalties that come along with that, the obligations, the requirements, and also the condemnation from the Most High if you're not fulfilling Torah the way He intended. So a lot of times I think that a lot of people are not fully educated and made aware of the most key central points that allows it to be successful. So I noticed that I would say it would be more men that would request that desire than women. But the interesting thing is that the women who do request it, or the ones who volunteer that they want to do it, a lot of them are aware of what the obligations are, the requirements are, and they make sure that man understands that. So those things are outlined in the ketubah, on the marriage certificate that they put down. Because remember, I mentioned earlier, I defined 4 terms. What I see in a lot of relationships and polygamous situations is that when the man, after he has a wife, and he decides that he wants to go and get another wife, number one, a lot of this is not laid out in the marriage certificate, which is a problem, because that should outline the do's and don'ts and what's allowed and what's not allowed, and it has to be agreed upon by both parties before they commit to that covenant contractual agreement. The man goes outside of his home and feels because he has the right or the allowance to get another wife, he goes outside of the marriage and does so on his own without letting his spouse know about it. You see, in all the cases that we have, in the scriptures where polygamous marriages were there, the other wives were aware of the other wives. Now, we have situations where men do not tell their first wife that there's a second wife. Don't tell the second wife there's a first wife. Don't tell the third wife there's a fourth wife. The communication is not there. And I think that's done a lot. And this is not to condemn anybody because, I don't know every case scenario, but from my general interfacing and counseling with people who do these things is because they're ashamed that if they told a woman up front what it is, before she gets into a contract with them, she would not be down for it. So it seems like there's a form of deceit involved. You know what I'm saying? And again, this is not for every case scenario, but I believe that the first wife should be aware of what this man's expectations are. He should be aware of what her expectations are. It should all be outlined in contract in that ketubah that they have written down that's going to certify their marriage. And in doing so, there has to be a proper protocol that's being enforced by elders to ensure that it's done righteously. Okay, and this is the problem is because now we're taking people with Hebrew Israelite ideology, but they still have the residue of Western thought, Western behavior, Western ideals, and they're trying to marry the two things together, and that's where you cause a problem. So when you don't counsel somebody before you give them the allowance of being in a polygamous marriage, you're also doing a disservice because there's nothing to curtail that person doing or committing injustice while they're going about this particular relationship. Okay, so people, I believe, need to be counseled to see if they are fit and that they fully understand the obligations, the penalties, etc., before they're able to take on an additional situation like that. Now, polygamous marriage would be very economically sound if it's done properly. For me, what I like to stress, I tell the man, I say, hey, everybody can't start their own business, but you should have a desire to start your own business. And the reason why I say that is because now you want to ensure that as the man, you have an obligation to provide for every reality of that woman's life. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're in America and you're an Israelite and you're married, the problem is going to happen is that when there's something that you lack, she has to go outside of that relationship to get. So, for example, if you are lacking the finances to support her, she's going to have to go outside of that relationship to go ahead and get those incomes for the sake of the children. Now, that's going to cause an issue because now, number one, she's going to have an obligation to an employer outside of that man, meaning that she's going to really have two masters, okay? And we know that that's not ideal. So, number one, she'd have to do number two. If there's an issue in regards to health or sickness and he is unable to find a solution within his congregation, within his own home, then she's going to have to go outside of them to go get that treatment, which, again, will infringe upon whatever ketubah you have that is not recognized by the state or federal government. Again, it creates an issue, okay? Then you have another situation where we're talking about an issue where the man is unable to provide, let's say, an inheritance, for whatever reason. Let's say that, he's been working a job and he's been from job to job. He hasn't been consistent in one job or doesn't have his own business, and he has nothing to pass on to that woman. Now, in those case scenarios, that woman is going to have to find some way to get inheritance or rights to something passed on to her children. Again, it creates another issue. But if you start up a family business, which should be the mindset of almost any Israelite individual, now what you're doing is you're going to be the man to say, okay, you know what, in the event that my family gets sick, I have this safeguard in place. In the event that I'm unable to get this amount of income because this is a family business and everybody's involved, everybody's going to be working to build the empire and the legacy and the inheritance. So everybody will be intricately involved and contributing to what is going to be passed on. Also, in regards to a situation where something is not done righteously, again, if there is no elders to preside over the matter, the woman's going to go outside of the relationship. She's going to complain to somebody else and cause the issue. But now the man says, listen, before I get into the relationship, I need to ensure there's some elders that can oversee it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the problem is that these safeguards are not in line, and because they're not in line, there's not a common understanding, there's not education, there's not counseling. Then you have men that are doing it for all the unrighteous reasons, and the women giving into it because they think that if they don't agree to it, the Most High is going to destroy them, the Most High is going to cast them away, et cetera. And then lastly, I think that the problem is that there's nobody to preside over these factors. These things are not outlined in these marriage contracts, and I think that they should get back to both parties understanding fully what is in the marriage contract. What are we agreeing in? When the Most High spoke to the children of Israel, he gave them a conditional covenant that they had to agree. And if they didn't, they would be sent or scattered. And the reason why we are scattered today is because we did not uphold our covenant and we are succumbing curses. So understanding that I would say that baseline premise is going to tell a person, listen, in order for me to receive a blessing from the Most High, I have to abide by the contractual covenantal agreement, the 613 laws plus, that I can fulfill within this captivity. And in doing so, I know that the Most High will give me blessings. But if you don't think the same thing beyond that and carry that over into relationship with family, relationship with a spouse, relationship with children, relationship with friends, associates, etc., now you're doing a disservice to the precept as to why the Most High has given that to you, because we are to reflect his character, we are to reflect his behavior, and we are to reflect the moral compass of justice that he employs via his laws.
And once again, I see we have a lot of people listening via phone, via Skype. Again, if you want to chime in, the number is 646-716-7320, and just press number 1 and we'll add you in. Today's show is entitled Polygamy, What's Wrong with That? My special guest is Raw Divine Prospect and Emunah Israel. Yes, Emunah, so same question goes to you. Who do you feel is pushing polygamy? Is it more of the ladies or the men? And what do you feel about that?
I'm inclined to agree with Brother Divine Prospect on this one in regard to my own personal experience from over a decade ago. Walking through the door, that is actually the first thing you hear. The way it is presented is one that it's like an agenda. And it's been crafted so wisely that it does lead women to believe that if you do not comply, then you're unrighteous. If you do not comply. So there's a whole sons of Belial thing going on. You understand what I'm saying? And oftentimes it's for the things or the unfulfilled desires of the lust that were not, but now you're getting an excuse, or oftentimes the men are getting a pass. And so because I'm getting a pass straight through the door, then I'm hearing this thing. I've also heard from men that this is what the men tell them, one away. You know, in the Caribbean we say one away, on the side. You understand? Yo, did you know? And this is a selling point. In one community, it's actually a selling point of the community. And this has been testified by those who are in the community. And so the way, the approach of it's really the men I see it coming from, and also women who are coming in with already, we are coming in at a deficit to a certain degree. You understand what I'm saying? And because some are willing to easily comply, and it's also some women were that type in the world. Some women are the ones who used to see other people with a man and want him anyway. So we have to understand that nothing really has changed from the world to knowing the truth. The personalities still remain the same, and depending on the laws that you want to subscribe to, some are going to be more favorable if you were that person already, and others are not going to be. So I see that it's more coming from the leadership and the teachers, and the women who were that type from the beginning, they just carry it on into where it is that, I want to be pleasing before the Most High. My issue is that it's really causing a division where I did not see that division in Torah. And today, like the brother said, it's really being pushed like this. If you disagree, if you say this is not for me, you're unrighteous. You're selfish, and all the name calling and all the downing. And I'm saying to myself, browbeating, this is not how you enter relationships. You understand what I'm saying? This is not how you build healthy bonds that's going to produce righteous children. Because the reality is, if the mother is under duress and she's into something that she doesn't want to be into, it's going to reflect on the children. If she's seeing, hearing, and feeling everything that's going on in the household, it's going to reflect on the children. I remember when I went overseas and met a brother who lived in a polygynous relationship, and I asked him, well, is this what you want to do? And he said no. And I said, well, why? Tell me. He said, because of what I saw my mother endure. You understand what I'm saying? And oftentimes the voices of the children who later become adults are silent. And when we see these same children who are born and grown in what we say we have the right to do, and they walk away, whether it be monogamous or polygynous, because we're not looking at the fact that we are supposed to be, like he said, that model and that example for them, then we have done it in vain. We're doing all of this in vain if we're really not looking at, we're supposed to have a good crop coming back. And just to touch a little bit on the money aspect and the finance aspect, like he said, I think often, yes, the men are doing it for these reasons. I've heard it plenty times. And I'm saying to myself, like I said before, well, who in the world, how are you going to have them go out and then send your children back to the same schools that you're trying to take your children out of? It's counterproductive. We're not thinking clearly. We're not looking through certain things to get to the crux of the matter. It's counterproductive. You get 3 women to have 12 children to send them all to school so that they can go to work so that you can deprogram on the Shabbat day and send them back. In real time, in layman's terms, what's happening more often than not is counterproductive. And I see the push coming from the men and now the women also, not all, but a good amount, are jumping after they have been, after months or years of being massaged mentally, emotionally, going in and picking out different scriptures. And I wanted to see if I could touch on one because the brother touched on one scripture, but I would, say for us to take a look back at that scripture, because when it's talking about the handmaiden and the father selling the daughter, when you look closely, I'm asking the question for everybody who's listening, look back at that scripture and go into all of the Hebrew if you're able to do that and see if it's really talking about a marriage or if it's talking about employment. There's things that we have been handed that leads us to believe one thing, but in actuality, because we're so disconnected from the culture, we automatically assume that's what it has to be. How many men who have wives or one wife has hired a help for her? That's my question. How many men say, you know what, I'm going to hire you a help, like George did for Weezy? You understand what I'm saying? Where is her help? Not the help that's laying with the man, the help that is her handmaiden, and when the time comes, she goes home. And they still exist today. They're called a maid. They're called, if you have children, they call an au pair. They call a nanny. You understand what I'm saying? It's no Arnold Schwarzenegger stuff, but we conveniently leave that part out. You're going to say we're in Babylon and we this, we that. But if we're going to bring back the culture, which a lot of the stuff that also, and then if anybody's on the call, what we're saying about culture, a lot of the stuff we saw Abraham and Sarah do, if you look at the times, if you look at something called the Nuzi tablets, N-U-Z-I, Nuzi tablets, if you look at the Hammurabi Code, which was up and around the same area that our forefathers came from, around the Chaldeans, what's today known as Iraq and these places. This culture was there. When you were barren, you looked for a surrogate, and that's what she was. She didn't become his wife. She became a surrogate, like today would be known as an egg donor. So because sometimes we want to push for a certain thought, we don't want to, like the brother saying, go back into the culture. But if you go back into that space and time and look through the laws that they had on record, you see some similar things to what Rachel did, to what Leah did, to what Sarah did. And it was because more of, I want to preserve the line, and it was barrenness. It was barrenness. It wasn't that you had 8, 9 children and I just want another wife. It was for the sense of barrenness, and you wanted to prolong that seed. We're not doing the same thing. We're not doing the same thing. We're doing something else. You understand? Because if you have 8 children and one job, that's a problem. You understand what I'm saying? In real time, if we have all of these children and the wife is not barren and she is the wife of your youth, you understand, and you're not there and understanding what a helpmate is, then you're negating the actual reason why the Creator said it's not good for man to be alone. So with that, I relinquish, because I could go on, like I said, but I'll leave it there.
Yeah, let me let Ron, Divine Prospect, jump in before we go to the phone lines again. Ron, anything you want to add? Go ahead. You can add something.
Well, I would say that the sister made some excellent points, and I'm in acquiescence with the majority of stuff that she said. The question I would have for the sister is that, Emunah, what was the scripture that you said to go back into? Because I can go back into the Hebrew if need be to
yes.
break it down.
It's in the Exodus, the one you just quoted, the 20. Let me go back.
Exodus 21.
21. Okay. Talking
about the servants.
Yes. And
okay.
I would submit that when we look at that, because I've looked at it and looked at it and looked at it, the beginning gives you the context of this conversation. It talks about these are the statutes concerning employment, basically, what today we hire ourselves out as employment. When you look at the way they A wife, when we jump down later in the scripture, the word wife is not there. It's italicized. And when we go into Hebrew, the word wife is not there. Also, the word betrothed is translated to a word that only appears once in the scripture, and the only place it appears is there. And when you look at the word for betrothal or a woman that is betrothed, the word is arasa. It's not the word that they indicate there. So under closer examination, when you look at the scripture, from what I'd lovely have a conversation, it's still talking about employment. And it's talking about someone who hired someone's daughter for food, clothing, and shelter in exchange for service. And then whether or not you don't like that maid servant, basically, Amma is what she's named, and you want to give it to your son, kind of like how Laban gave his maid servant Zilpah and Bilhah to his daughters, then you have to treat her after the manner of daughters. You cannot mistreat her. You still have to provide food, clothes, and shelter. And it goes on to say, if you don't do this, you have to let her go free. She wasn't your wife. You employed her, but now you reneged on that contract, and you cannot try to recoup your investment. You have to let her go because you did not do what you said you were going to do. And I saw the reality, the working reality, because I look a lot about the African culture, especially West Africa. And when you look in a lot of the media that comes out of West Africa, you see this practice that a poor village man or woman would sell or hire out their child in exchange for that child, making sure that child eat, that child is clothed, and that child is taken care of. And you cannot mistreat that child. And so because we are missing that element and that understanding of what it is to be the employer, I can see how often within time we translate this scripture particularly as it being a wife. But one of the key things for me is if she was the father's wife, then he could not give her to the son, because now that is going to be in violation of Torah, that the son and the father cannot lay with the same woman. And so this is why I say that after much study, that scripture that is being used often to say it is a wife, in actuality, it is an employee.
Okay. All right. So with that being laid out, I understand exactly what you're saying in regards to employment because, yes, it has to do with servitude. And, again, it has to do with the status of the common or the layman during that time and the things that were done in regards to women. This is why the concept of a bride dowry has been employed, because when a woman is taken out of her home, now there's going to be more work in the home or the household that she is unable to do because now she is some other man's wife. So this is why the husband has to pay a dowry to the father as compensation for loss of servitude within that home. So this is why the dowry also is something that's very important, because if a man cannot provide dowry to the household that he's removing this woman from, which will add an additional burden to the household, then he's not even fit to have her as his wife. Okay? Now, in every case scenario is different, because every woman who's getting married may be a woman on her own, and she may not have a father who's alive. Her father may be a deadbeat if he is alive, so there's nobody to be dowry to be paid to. So in that case, there would be an exemption. But the problem with this particular verse is that when people say this is a stipulation for marriage, and this is not a stipulation for marriage. Now, a particular servant can become the helpmate of the man. But again, in regards to what this is speaking of, the most important thing is we have to look at verse 10, 21 and verse 10, because 20 verse 10, we have the term there that has to do with a conjugal interaction or a cohabitation, depending on how you say it, voanata. So when we look at veonata, we're looking at a cohabitation in regards to some kind of conjugal right for that woman who is taken in. If she is given to the man, the owner's or the master's son, that he cannot deprive her of food, clothing, and cohabitation to reside with him, or anything that involves that cohabitation, such as a conjugal right, meaning sexual intimacy. That should be provided to that woman, because if she is relegated to the household, then she also, number one, needs to have the right to bear children, and number two, she needs to be fulfilled as well. You know, so if the father is giving the servant to the son, and he takes her in and decides to marry another or take another, the word there is take another. The word isha is not there. Ahet is there. Isha is not there, but it's implied when we go to see the pronoun that's being used for her in that particular verse. So I agree with the sister in regards to it talking about servitude and not a stipulation for marriage, But at the same time, that servant that's being taken in, that woman who's a servant that's being taken in, she has the same rights as a woman who is going to be taken, an additional woman that's going to be taken by the son into the household. She should not be deprived of those rights. The same rights that other woman will be given, she also has to be given the same equally. Okay, and if not, then she must be let go. There's no way that the man can say, you know what, you're mine and mine forever. And I think the problem with a lot of these polygamous marriages is that a woman thinks this is something that is forever, irregardless of what is being done in that relationship. And there are what's called remedy and recourses that will allow that woman to come up out of that situation and get a recourse, meaning that some form of compensation because some damage has been done to herself or the children that she has in that particular situation. Now, we don't have situations, say, in America now, where we have people selling servants to another. You know, that has been outlawed, and we can see that in the Bill of Rights. If you look at the 13th and 14th Amendment, we understand that now that type of system cannot be done here in America. Hence why I said earlier that if this is going to work ideally, it has to be on a place where people have their own land, they have their own nationality, their own body politic, they're able to govern themselves without the interference of the state or federal authorities, where they can ensure that justice is being taken place within that community or that common unity that everybody has to have and agree upon, which will be Torah. So a lot in this passage is for that particular point in time, and only a few of the precepts or the principles can be applied today, which notably one of them is that you cannot deprive a woman who is serving in your home of the rights of any other woman additionally that's taken into the home. So that precept or that principle can be applied, but the literal application of this text, it can't be done today because a lot of these groups of people do not have their own land to enforce these things or have a society whereby which servants need to be given for compensation for the betterment of the rest of the family, dowries are being given, etc. These things are not occurring in this American society because, again, most of the Israelites that live here have not established, proclaimed, or declared their independence of this nation that they have a contract and paying tribute to, so they can enforce everything that's here in Torah. And that's the problem, is when they cherry pick scriptures and throw it into a situation, and it's like, yo, you know, did somebody sell you that woman? Did somebody sell you that woman? Did you take her from some other man's home and pay a dowry? Like, these questions need to be asked, because if this is not taking place, then this scripture does not literally apply to those particular situations. But the principle can still be applied in regards you cannot reject the woman who's already in your home, who's serving the home, any rights, any inheritance, any food, clothing, conjugal rights, cohabitation, etc. You cannot deny her of these things, because if you're doing so, there's an injustice, and that injustice needs to be dealt with swiftly and harshly in my position. So,
Brother Sal, I just want to say thank you for that, Brother Sal. I just want to say something before you went to the phone line.
Yeah, go ahead, no problem. Go ahead.
Okay. I would like to hear. You don't have to do it now, but if, at another time, or just shoot me and tell me what you find out on it. Because this word H5772, it's an unused root in Hebrew, meaning dwell together. They translated it as sexual cohabitation or duty of marriage, but it's only used one time in the scripture in this context. There's several words in this scripture here that's only used one time. Now, we know that the scripture has words for such as shakab, to lay down with, such as yashab, also to marry and things of that nature. Shakan is another one. So it more than has words that deals with lodging and sexual activity as it relates to a man and a woman. In this particular instance, the word that they use for betrothal is not the word that we see any place else for marriage. And the word that they use for cohabitation and what we're translating as sexual intercourse is not used any other place in the scripture from what I have studied. So what I am submitting once again, is to take another look at this scripture, because the Amma that is talking about, for instance, I went to the Beta Israelites in Ethiopia. And one brother, he had a wife and he had a daughter. This is a real story. So he goes to the country. I'm not going to drop his name, right? He goes to the country. Next day, we come to check him at his crib. He got a young Amma, 13 years old, a young girl who the parents were poor. This is a real situation. And they sent their child. They didn't send their child to marry him. They sent their child so that the child could be fed, clothed, and have employment. And at night in Ethiopia, they let the employees go to work. I mean, not go to work, go to learn, get their GED, go to learn. And so this young girl was not expected to lay with him. This young girl was expected to have a place to sleep, to have dwelling and habitation and food, and not to be mistreated. And so what I'm saying is, because it still exists, you understand, in this country it's called a live-in aid, where it is that person goes in, a CNA, a HHA, they go into a dwelling and they live there to aid the people in that establishment. It is not expected that they're going to marry the man of the house. So what I'm saying is, culturally and contextually, if we look at it, that this still exists around the world, the notion that Florence Jefferson should have been laying with, George because she was in the house, to me, that's like, wow. And we're like, no, never. Florence ain't going to lay with George. But if we translate this scripture that she is supposed to get this duty of marriage as opposed to a room to be able to sleep in, yes, it would be an error. So I'm just saying once again, and the reason why I'm pushing for this is because this is one of the major scriptures that are used, like you're saying, out of context, number one, and number two, to begin to convince women that, hey, if I don't do that such and such, then you can just go ahead. You understand? This is one of the major things that are used in that context. So I want to submit that. Definitely anyone who's out there who can look at those words and really break it down and let me know if you find it anywhere else in the text, definitely let me know. So once again, thank you for letting me speak again, and I look forward to hearing the callers.
Yeah, well, Ron, if you want to try to tackle that now, or you want to, come back another time?
Well, I'll just say something really brief because, I mean, I can really go down the break, and like the sister said, me and her could probably build off the line and go in depth about it. I think we're more in agreement than disagreement. The only thing is that the situations that she proposed makes a lot of sense. But in this particular sense, when we're talking about the word makar, or we're talking about the word meaning to sell, comes from the root word makar, which is memchet and resh. That literally means a merchant sale. That's the same thing if you go to the store and you purchase an item from the store, it's being sold to you, it is now yours and within your possession. So that woman is the possession of that master, hence the word they use for master. So what I was saying is that the precept would be, if we're looking for that word cohabitation from Anah, which I agree with the sister, it's not literally saying to lay down or to have intercourse, because this particular scripture was not referring to specifically with marriage. The thing is that if this young woman is being sold and somebody is purchasing her and she's being given to somebody else or the master's son, then she becomes his possession. Now, if that woman has no children, if that woman is unable to provide an inheritance for her family's name, okay, so what would be given to her in that circumstance? Food and clothing is great, but now what happens when she wants to have children? She will be deprived of that. If there's no kind of conjugal interface, she will be deprived of having any children, because now she has no way to get out of that situation except for the remedies that are provided there. If those remedies are not met, now she is there stuck in that situation, and now she may not have no kids. If she's just living there for food and clothing, then that means that any seed that she can pass on with her DNA is not going to go to the future generations. And if that is the only daughter of a man who sold his daughter for the sake of whatever the circumstances was, now that family's line cannot be continued. So this is why the inference in regards to a conjugal interface can be done, because that woman, as well as the food, clothing, shelter, and cohabitation, now if there's an opportunity for her to pass on her lineage or the name of her family, then she is entitled to have those same rights that the man would give to any other woman that he brings into the home. For whatever purpose, she should have the same equal rights within that home, and she should have the same access to him for those rights that every other woman who he brings in, when you use the term another, that he brings in should have. So no injustice should be done to her. But again, like I said, I'm in acquiescence with the sister, this is not a specific scripture in regards to marriage. This is a particular situation that was happening at that particular period of time, and now things have to be regulated. That's why the Torah is there. Even the Mishnah, as complementary to the Torah, was there, because there are certain things that's not even in Torah, but situations will pop up that needed to be addressed. So, again, like I said, I'm an active answer with the sister. The only thing that I would have to say in addition to that is that that woman being sold is the property of that master, and if he gives it to his son, it's his property. Now she should be entitled to the same things that any other woman that man brings into the house. And if he brings a woman in for the sole purpose of laying his seed so that way he can pass on his family name, or she can also have lineage, then that other woman who was a servant within a home should be entitled to the same rights, to the same privileges, and no injustice should be done towards her.
Oh, boy, this thing getting turned up.
I
got one more thing to say.
Unless you got to come back.
It's all good. It's your time. Y'all got
it. I love this. Is good, sis. This is good, man.
Conversation. But check it out, brother. Divine. If we go to the top of the verse, as it relates to the question of whether, and I have two things to say, and then hopefully, but as we go to the top of the verse, we see a scenario where, and if the master gives him a wife, who? The manservant. If he gives the manservant a wife, because we have to also remember that in ancient times there was a level of kind of a class system. You understand what I'm saying? So, therefore, just to be laying with the servant girl or the bondwoman, as Sarah said, was not necessarily cool. You understand what I'm saying in terms and contexts of that? So we do see scenarios where the master, it didn't say that these were the only servants he had. And
no, it doesn't say that.
See right at the top of the verse that he can give a female servant to a male servant for them to reproduce. Another last thing that I want to say is when we look at the case of Father Abraham had many servants. But it didn't say, he lay with all the female servants. That did not come up until the barrenness of Sarah emerged. It wasn't for the sake of, you are Hagar, the stranger, I want you to have children. That's why she said, let me bear on your knees, meaning, really, this is my child that you're having for me. So we see a situation where one of our forefathers had many servants that he bought with his money. That's why when it says when he went to go circumcise, we see the magnitude of his household. Those who were bought with your money and born in your house. But just because he acquired these servants and some were gifted does not mean he laid with them. And we see that he had no seed.
I didn't mean to cut you off, sir. I just have a question for you, because a lot of people, when they refer to Abraham, they leave out Keturah. Keturah was another wife, and not only was she a wife, he had children with her. Not only he had children with her, he gave a bestowment to her children. So now we have a situation outside of Sarah and Hagar, which I agree. Now he's taking on a third wife. So taking on his third wife.
Come again. Hold on, brother. Wait a minute. No, Keturah came. Keturah came into the story after Sarah had already passed away. So in reality,
I agree.
She wasn't another wife. There weren't two wives beside themselves in their lifetime. So Sarah was passed away, and Sarah was aware that Hagar was not a wife, because the scripture says he gave presents to the Pelegesh, or the concubine's children.
There you go. So what would be the purpose of Keturah then? Why did he marry Keturah?
Keturah comes afterwards, because because the Most High says it's not good for man to be alone, and that word alone, funny enough, in the Hebrew is bad for some strange reasons. So at that point, when Sarah is no longer there, he's alone, and so he goes on to continue. But at the time when she was there, another instance is, we have two instances in Torah. We have barrenness and a way to remedy the barrenness. On one, we have we'll get a surrogate. If we look in the Hammurabi Code, if we look in the Nuzi tablets, we'll see this practice. This practice is, I'm going to get a handmaiden. She is not your wife. She is my egg donor, my surrogate, and she's going to be a children. Secondly, we see that in the case of Ribkah or Rebecca and Isaac, they prayed. It says Isaac went and entreated the Most High on behalf that he may open her womb. So in one instance, we took it upon ourselves to say, here, this is the remedy. In another instance, he did not introduce, or she did not introduce that thought. What they did do was beseech the Creator, and the Creator opened the womb. And Yitzchak or Isaac was satisfied in that situation. You understand what I'm saying? So what we see is that we can go two different roads, but one oftentimes proves more problematic, as we say later on in the case of Jacob, Leah, Raquel,
and that's like,
so
and that's like a. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I'm just saying that.
No. I was going to say that's.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, sis.
No, no, you can go ahead. that's basically what I wanted to say. In looking at it, when we want to go back, it's not something that was an anomaly. People say, oh, Ima Sawa was just so right. No, this is what they did. This was part of the culture of where they came from. You understand? And so much so that they laid it down on record that you can cross-reference. When Abraham asked, shall Eliezer inherit? That was something that they did, that your chief servant, if you did not have seed, would inherit. And as an inheritor of your estate, they had certain responsibilities, like burying, wailing, and all of these things for you when you died. So the question that Abraham asked was not out of the context of where he was living, because he knew, well, if this dude inherits, what happened to me? And the Creator said, no, that's not going to happen to you, and you are going to bear seed. And I just want to put at this time that not only did he say you're going to bear seed specifically, because sometimes men don't think it's important who bears the seed. You understand what I'm saying? Who is the so to say, the ground that's going to bring forth this child? And it is so important that the Most High said, yeah, I hear you. I heard your prayers for Ishmael, but I'm sorry. It's going to be Sarah, and this is going to be the child that you have. So we have to see the importance in ancient time that you didn't just go to the corner store and pick up another Isha. Wow, they just like that. It doesn't work like that. You understand what I'm saying? It says a virtuous woman who can find. You don't just, chill, sis, I'm sorry, I bumped into you at Macy's. No, it doesn't work like that. But this is what is happening. They're so common that, like, oh, wow, you're so virtuous. You have like 5 of them, and your brother over here has none. You understand? What about that? What about that disparity in the numbers where men are accumulating women, and you have brothers who are single and have none and have no seed? So oftentimes we're talking about the selfishness, quote unquote, that you don't want to share your man. But what about the men who are hoarding the women, and other men are not getting the opportunity even to be one to one woman? But I relinquish the mic at this point.
Oh, okay. That's what's up. Now, I would say that since it sounds a lot like me when I teach, I would just throw it on here to share. And she definitely was breaking a lot of things out in regards to what was going on in antiquity and the culture and the customs of the people. And the tablets that she's referring to, which people should see, a lot of people know about the Hammurabi Code in regards to it being established by Hammurabi, who was an Amorite. And in that code, it did not just specifically deal with capital punishment, where we know a lot. It says eye for an eye, 2.2, but it also dealt with everyday situations in regards to marital affairs, in regards to collateral for damage of something, etc. So it's very important to actually examine that to get an idea of what was going on at that time. The thing that I will say is that when we look at the Hammurabi Code and we look at what was going on in Palestine at the time, now Abraham came from Syria when the Most High revealed himself to him, and he left from Syria or Aram, and he went south to Palestine, or what we call in those times Israel or Canaan. And when he went there was a different group of people that was abiding there, as opposed to when we look at the Amorites that were there in the Babylonian area where Hammurabi was presiding about 1750 BCE. Now, there's different dates that people give to the existence of Abraham. I say that Abraham existed a couple hundred years before the Hammurabi Code, but this culture was still there amongst the people. It was just codified and erected as a stela for everybody to see, hence why the Hammurabi Code is still in existence today, because it was designed for something to be a public display to the people. So I agree with everything she said in regards to that. The only thing that I thought was kind of interesting is that she said that the scripture said that man should not be alone, hence why Abraham took Keturah. Now, that's a great inference, but there's no specifics for that there within Bereshit chapter 25. It doesn't really specify that Abraham was alone and the Most High decided to pair him with the mate. It didn't say that. It says Abraham took another mate. So we have a verb form there where he is actively doing it. He took the mate for himself, just like the situation happened with Hagar. The same situation happened with Torah. The Most High was not involved in this marriage here, because there's nowhere in the text that said that the Most High decided to pair Keturah with Abraham so that way he would not be alone in his latter days. It doesn't say that. So I only said it to say that, yes, we'll look at it from a cultural paradigm based on everything you said, and I believe that Abraham made another decision for himself. He wasn't told in advance or prospectively that Sarah would die and I would give you another helpmeet. None of that stuff was told to him. He made another decision on his own, and he took this other Isha for it to be his wife or his concubine, however we want to call it, and laid seed in her and created more offspring. I believe from my particular, and I don't like using that word belief, but from my particular contextual analysis of the Torah, that Midian was responsible for bringing forth who we know as Jethro, and as we know as Moshe, when he left out of Egypt, he came to the land of Midian, and he was taken in by a cousin from his ancestor. You know what I'm saying? So it wasn't a foreign nation that was housing Moshe when he experienced an encounter with the Most High, but the Most High set it up so that way Midian could be here, so that way his descendants can be there in the land of Northwest Arabia, Midian, so that way they can comfort and counsel Moses as long as when he went along his journey through the wilderness and when the children of Israel went into Israel. So the only thing I would say, in addition to what the sis said, is that she was on point, with the exception of the text in Bereshit chapter 25 does not say that the Most High paired Keturah with Abraham. This was a decision that he made on his own, looking at the verb stem there for the word took or taking. And we see that it's something that he did in the context. He did something active, and it was nothing had to do with no intervention of the Most High in that particular case scenario.
All right, brother.
Once again, very interesting dialogue. You know, I'm loving it. Once again, it's Debate Talk for You Radio. You know that number, 646-716-7320. Again, I see we have a lot of people making comments on social media and liking it and also sharing it on their personal page. We appreciate you sharing this show. Polygamy, what's wrong with that? And once again, this is your time. If you have any questions or comments, press the number 1 and we'll add them to the conversation. You know, some of my special guests, you see them on YouTube, you see them in lectures, and now, you know, this is your time to actually reach out and speak to the individuals. So, again, you know, take advantage. The number is 646-716-7320. Let's go to the first caller. Matter of fact, let's go back to Laurent. Laurent, 314. You're live in there.
What's going on? Peace to everybody. Peace, sister. Peace, Brother Divine. And peace, Brother Sai. What's going on with y'all, man?
Hey, what's up, man?
What's going on? Yeah, this is a good class, man. I definitely getting a lot of understanding from it. You know, my perspective on it, what I've experienced. You know, I've never been in, so to speak, in a legal polygamy relationship, but you know, I have been in relationships where I was with different women, and I will say this, even from the biblical standpoint, when you look at the Bible and you begin to read it and you study it, you see that nothing came up good about of it at all, really. Like when they had them different wives, it always was a sword in their house. Later on down, even with Midian, when he went into Keturah like that, later on, those two became a stumbling block before them. Ishmael became a stumbling block. Then when Esau joined with Ishmael. So it became crazy, man. But when you look at the whole thing of it, I think that some of the things that America have done as far as laws are divinely fired. I think because the problems that you guys are mentioning right now is why they set up these laws. See, there's certain laws that can protect us in America that have to be set up. That was set up before America because America took on those laws. Either they was governed by their conscience before it was seared, but a lot of things that they did was set up just for this prime reason. Like some people don't know that if you're gonna have another wife, you need to have another house. You can't have these two women in the same household, and I think that a lot of people, they don't understand that, and then now in these days, 90% of the people that's American, I can't speak for America, they're just doing it because they lusting. That's just bottom line. They just doing it because they see somebody that got a nice body, or they see this, they're doing it because they lusting. It causes problems. I'm going to say from my experience, what I experience is, for instance, I have 3 children. I have 2 by my wife now, and I have 1 by the first mother of my child. Lot of problems. I don't even have sex with the first mother of my child. But just the problems there is because you didn't treat this child this way. You didn't do this child that way. On both parties, with my wife and the first mother of my child. So it brings a lot of problems. Plus, if you want to keep your hairline please, brothers, I'm telling you, you want to live longer, please, man, it's best to stay with one woman, man. Women are beautiful creatures. We got to love them. But on one factor, they're emotional sometimes. So therefore, you have to understand how to balance that thing and dwell with your woman with all understanding. And when you with different women, it's a hard thing, man. It's a hard thing. So I just want to, say good class, man, good information, man, y'all bringing out. And hopefully some of these brothers will understand, because economically, we're not, and politically, we're not even there yet, man. We're not, government-wise, we're not there. People just doing it for a lust thing, man. Then they got to be careful, because homosexuality is rising up, getting all type of Greek orgies, everybody living in the same house. Then not only that is, half of those people are on the system, getting government assistance. Not saying nothing is wrong with it, but you can't even support those things. You don't even have your own. You get medical. You got to get Medicaid, medical stuff, and all of that. It's a lot of factors behind it. So you guys are doing a great job. Keep it up, man.
We appreciate the call. Ron Divine Prospect, you want to say anything? Go ahead.
No, I think that LaRon made an excellent point. There's really not much for me to add on. The point of contention that I would have with him is when he used the term illegal, because that's a very relative term when he said that, he doesn't want to be involved in anything illegal like that. I know me and LaRon, I know LaRon, so I know his position on certain things. So I would say that from a moral perspective, I think that he made a great point in regards to being able to not bite off more you can chew. You should only take on that which you can manage and which you're able to enforce righteously. And if you're unable to do that, then that is not for you. You understand what I'm saying? So circumstances will dictate whether or not that type of situation is necessary. But at the same time, it needs to be regulated, and there needs to be penalties involved for those parties who decide that they don't want to do what's right in that situation. So I think the brother made some excellent points. And like I said, the only thing that I would have a point of contention would be when he mentioned the term illegal, because, again, that's relative. And via the whatever situation that you look at as far as worldview and culture and geographic location, it is not illegal. So one culture can't say that to another culture distinctly, okay, well, what you're doing is illegal, and this is why we do it here. Did we do it the right way? You do it the wrong way, because you're imposing.
I didn't mean to say it was illegal. I'm sorry about that, because it definitely ain't illegal. It is permissive. So I definitely agree with you. I didn't mean to say it was illegal, because it's definitely.
No problem, LaRon. No problem. But otherwise, me and him is an acquiescence. We saying the same thing. Don't bite off more than you can chew. And to deal with things righteously. So.
Mm-hmm. And Sister Emunah, anything you want to say to anything that was said? Anything you want to address?
I think me and Brother LaRon was on another show. So best of yourself, Brother LaRon. You said like Brother Divine was saying, you said some real stuff. One of the things that, as you said it jumped out to me in my studies over these years is a real point that oftentimes goes swept under the rug, where in reality a lot of these women are being forced and implored to go on the system to support a lifestyle that cannot be supported. You understand what I'm saying? So there's a thing that oftentimes you see when you read the Torah is like when Israel is in a misbehaving standpoint, Moses said, you profane my name amongst the nations. You understand what I'm saying? And we have to take a look at our behavior and the things that we're doing while we're swinging ZTs with head wraps and Beged, Deem, and all of this stuff. We have to look at what it is we're doing and what it is that we're professing and whether or not our actions and deeds are glorifying the Creator or is it bringing shame and a reproach to the name of the Most High. So definitely that one of putting the women or having to them to forcibly go because they cannot take care of the children, the offspring is my point. Mm-hmm. We're planting all of these seeds, but you have no field. You understand what I'm saying? So right now, wisdom is like on the rooftop calling, like, what are we doing? You understand? So I just want to thank Brother LaRon just for being so transparent because oftentimes, we don't want to say the real, and people go into it only to see that oftentimes, more often than not, they're in quicksand, sinking. And along with them goes women, children, and the men. Like you said, it is a level of stress that's added on the men. There's a level of, from going from one person to the next. And we're not even going spiritually yet. We're not talking about what happens on a spiritual level. Right now we're just talking physical. And even when we get emotional, people say, oh, that's women's stuff. But the reality is when we look at the whole thing spiritually, what we're doing in the level of intercourse, when it is that you're absorbing someone else's energy, you understand what I'm saying? In that most precious and that most sacred space, and you're smearing it in around. And I wanted to say the word common means being shared by more than one people. And I know people may gonna be like, what, Emunah? But look it up, right? Common, when someone has something in common. So now when we look at a relationship, and I began to look at this because it bothers me, it irks me when I hear people say divine marriage. And I wonder, where did they get this from? Because when you look at the word common, it means it's being shared by more than one person. So right now, those women, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, have this man in common. So my question to the panel as well as the audience, with that definition, is it sacred or is it common? I'm sorry, I relinquished the mic.
Once again, it's your time, people. You have any questions or comments, you know that number by now, 646-716-7320. By the way, we have about 3 more shows this week. Debate Talk for You. Actually, we're not going to have a show tomorrow, but on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday we'll have a show. And also next week we'll have shows Monday to Friday. So we're going to have a full schedule over here right there, Debate Talk for You. For the listeners out there, we appreciate you guys. Ron Divine Prospect, you want to address anything? Go ahead.
No, I think the sister made an excellent point. And, again, you know, it's just good to have a conversation where people are on the same wavelength, you know, in regards to the position. You know, my thing is that I don't superimpose my personal conviction onto others. What I try to do is speak objectively, realistically, given the pros and cons so that a person can see why I take my position, and also I can give the information to them in the event that they want to take the same position. But we have to do so where we're not imposing things. You know, when a person imposes monogamy, they impose polygamy, when they impose bigamy, when they impose these things, that's where I feel like the problem comes in. I think the most important thing is to educate the pros and cons of any of these situations and give the people the tools to righteously divide and to discern what is compatible with them, their lifestyle, their circumstance, their situation, and to move with that, and also be willing to be accountable to a council so that way things can be overseen and that justice can be done within that situation.
Most definitely. Now, when it comes to the practice of polygamy, is there a difference between the way our Hebrew brethren practice it and the other nations? Is there a difference, Ron Divine Prospect?
Okay, so I like this is very organic and informal. So anything I prepared, I pretty much just took it off the table, and that's fine. I like it like this anyway, very raw and uncut. I would say that it would depend upon the guidelines. So if we're going to, for example, there's no chapter in Torah that tells us exactly how a polygamous relationship should be done. You know, there's no one-on-one there that tell you exactly how it should be done. So a lot of things are derived from passages that pass through it, that stop by it, but does not really specifically codify and outline what it fully entails. And I think that that's where a lot of the discrepancy comes from in understanding, because there's nothing fully outlined to say, okay, this is how this should be done. So a lot of things comes from piecing together precepts to get an understanding of what the text is saying. Then you have to go extra biblically and look at the sister cultures at the time to see what was being done. And this is when the sister had brought up, you know, the Code of Hammurabi, Nisha tablets, etc. You'd have to do that type of research as well, and you'd have to syntax everything together to be able to get the full picture. So I would say that the most important thing when it said other nations, we'd have to look to see, well, what constitution are these other nations bound to? What are the contractual agreements these other nations do? You know, because what I wanted to present earlier, but due to time, I'm gonna refrain because I would like callers to, you know, have their time to speak and say whatever it was. I was gonna go into the various African countries that employ polygamy and more so polygyny, and explain from their cultural precepts why it's being done. The sister touched on a few things that is common, in Africa, because Africa is the major continent that has the most polygamous relationships than everywhere else on the planet, than any other continent, And I wanted to touch on South Africa, Senegal. I wanted to touch on Ghana, Nigeria. I wanted to touch on Gambia. I wanted to touch on all of these countries to pretty much explain what their precepts is. But upon my research and studying it, what I've learned, which is very, very interesting, is that a lot of the precepts that's in the scriptures, right, at the time period where it was going on. See, in America, we've been westernized, we've been modernized, we've been to think that we're a first world nation and so forth. But what we don't understand is that every country does not have the same things that we have. They don't have the possession of the same things we have. They don't have the progression of the same things. They don't have the industries. There's certain things that we have here that we take for granted that other nations do not have. So when studying the primitive form in regards to polygamy, the best way to analyze it is not here in this particular Western society, but to look to see how it is righteously practiced by indigenous tribes who have not been adversely affected by white supremacy, colonialism, imperialism, etc., to see the pristine state and that which they are practicing it. And one thing that I wanted to bring up that I thought was very interesting is researching is Liberia. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that Liberia is very interesting because back in the 19th century, in 1800s, free blacks were being sent to Liberia to settle in Liberia. The ACS, which was a white Christian organization, thought it to be wise to relocate the so-called free blacks and other slaves who had been free via manumission and other purposes and relocate them to Liberia. Now, the interesting thing is that we have a Western African-American, quote-unquote, that is being displaced from all of the things that they were exposed to in regards to white supremacy and exposed to in regards to white culture, exposed to it, and I say white with quotations because that's another broad term, but I say it colloquially so that way the listeners can understand what I mean by that, and the subjugation to the European slave masters and how they practiced their religion, how they practiced their culture, and a lot of the slaves having Stockholm Syndrome being disconnected and removed from their indigenous culture and being brought over here to Americas. They are being displaced to what they were practicing before they were disconnected. Now, the reason why Liberia is an excellent study, and I'm going to go ahead and bring this part up in my my presentation I was going to give, but I just want to read this real quick. I want to show people that we're talking about, this is why I said worldview and culture is very important. The reason why the Liberia's situation did not work out is because you have these African Americans who have been disconnected and displaced from the indigenous culture by several hundred years, are being uprooted after they've been indoctrinated with European culture. A lot of them suffer from Stockholm Syndrome, post-slave traumatic disorder, etc., and being relocated. Even the free blacks who had businesses and so forth, they are taking on the format of the Europeans that were here in the Western world. And now you're bringing all of this to an indigenous land with an indigenous culture of people that have different customs, traditions, ways of life, behavior, etc., and now you're trying to force or superimpose one onto the other. Now you have these Western African Americans who think they have some form of superiority over the indigenous people that were there, and they believe that the practices that they maintained were more primitive to that which they were practicing when they was in America. Now we have a cultural clash, and that causes an issue, and that in itself helps to create a barrier so that way acculturation does not take place. So in this particular article, I'm going to read it. It's from the article called The Perspective. I'm going to read this real quick, and I just want to just give a really brief summary because, again, I want to save time so callers can speak. But I want people to understand is that we have to be able to identify that one culture of people cannot superimpose their will onto another culture of people and say that, well, because we practice it and you don't, you're wrong and we're right. You know what I'm saying? Especially when you're in different geographic locations that necessitate that certain things have to happen based on economic situations, political situations, social situations, etc. So this article goes on to say, but the major problem one finds with polygyny in Liberia started with the Americo-Liberian settlers. Prior to their arrival in what is known today as Liberia, polygyny was the acceptable form of marriage practiced by the indigenous inhabitants. Now, there's also a book in regards to this particular situation of these Americans going back to Liberia and documenting how the natives there were living, and it was in stark contrast to what they had been indoctrinated in when they was in America. It goes on to say that prior to their arrival in what is known today as Liberia, polygyny was an acceptable form of marriage practiced by the indigenous inhabitants. The establishment of Liberia as a Christian state gave rise to the conflict between polygyny and monogamy. In other words, since Americo-Liberian settlers condemned the practice of polygyny, monogamy was emphasized like other Western cultural hegemony in the Liberian society. However, the natives, as African Liberians, were allowed to continue the practice of polygyny. Now, pay close attention to this part. It says, but the Americo-Liberians who condemned the practice of polygyny found themselves practicing a brand of polygyny called Chrismonopoly, Christians' monopoly of marriage in brackets. Chrismonopoly became the form of marriage practiced by the settler. People are like, well, what does that mean? It says it is an arrangement in which a male settler is married to his monogamous or Christian wife and at the same time is engaged in a polygynous relationship with the native African Liberian women. The origin of the relationship between the African Liberian woman and the Americo-Liberian man can be traced back to the plantations in North America where the Americo-Liberians were once slaves. On these plantations, the white slave masters were engaged in monogamous marriage and at the same time were allowed to have at will the slave women. The children produced out of this relationship were never considered part of the slave master's family, but rather their properties. Whenever they saw it fit, they would sell these women and their offspring for economic gain. Similar practice was established in Liberia by the Americo-Liberian settlers. The Liberian experience was such that the offspring that was produced out of the relationship between the Americo-Liberian men and the African-Liberian women were not considered legitimate children. Instead, they were referred to as outside children. On the other hand, the mothers of these children in most cases were referred to as their country women, when we see like Hagar and things of that nature, whereas the children of the monogamous marriage were viewed as legitimate or inside children. Of course, there were some exceptions, but in most cases, this was the accepted norm. In some cases, the country women live on the farms of the Americo-Liberians. Social and economic opportunities as well as certain privileges were reserved for the so-called legal wives and their children, while the country women and their children could barely make ends meet. This is the last paragraph. It says, serious social problem emanated from the practice of Chrismonopoly. Some of the problems, bastard and legitimate children, that polygyny was established to solve. For example, in a Chrismonopoly relationship, a distinction was made as to who were inside or outside children. This was never the case in a polygynous relationship that was indigenous to the inhabitants of Liberia. As a matter of fact, the entire village was responsible in raising the children. And the reason why I want to put this out there and put it out there because the question is there a difference between, as Hebrew Israelites, how we practice this and how other individuals practice this? We have to look at culture clashing, enculturation, acculturation, and we have to look at case studies so that we can examine to see, well, if this was the situation that's occurring, how much of our Western mindset are we holding on today? How much of that residual do we have and that we're bringing into the cultural paradigm of Torah? Because if we're not able to make a distinction between the two, then what we're doing is that we're merging two different cultures through the process of acculturation, and we're bringing a hybrid system that cannot work in reality. This is why a lot of the things that I had mentioned earlier as far as the safeguards need to be put in place. So if this is practice, it should not be imposed, number one, but number two, come with conditions, come with an understanding, be on a contractual agreement, and have criminal penalties if it is not enforced properly. But we also have to examine real-life case studies to see how this process works when two different worldviews interface with one another, how they view each other, and why there's a political situation that we see there now with the few natives who were from the Americas who were African Americans and the indigenous people, and you will understand the social climate in regards to Liberia as a case study. Now, the good thing about the sister on the line is that she mentioned from her experience of witnessing eyewitness accounts in Ethiopia and in Israel, and what she was also doing was bringing case studies. Case studies is very important because we can speak about this all the time, but if we're not bringing examples for people to go back and study and research, then we're going to be disconnected in how it's being applied in reality, and I'll leave it at that.
All right, Sister Emunah Israel, you want to add anything to that question?
That was a great lead up. That was like an alley-oop back in the day. I think for that one, Brother Divine Process, because that's what I'm about. I'm about real-time case studies. This is stuff that I have seen, I have visited, I have seen in the workings, and I've done many years of research over the time just looking at, there's a plethora of documentaries. One thing that really gets me oftentimes is when we say Western, and I'm like, no, I don't think it's a Western, totally Western mentality. It's human. Because when you look at a lot of the things that have come on, I like, if anybody wants the link of documentaries, just link me, because I have a whole, 100 and something pages of research that I finally compiled out, I don't know how many different notebooks over the years. I understand. And someone asked me one time, and I just started sending. They're like, okay, stop. So, but what I'm saying is, from Iran to Africa to Israel to all parts of the world where this is something that has been happening. When you look at the social effects of it, when you look at the psychological effects of it, it is not a Western issue, because we can condition. When we say culture, from what it is that I've studied, culture is a level of conditioning, something that it is that we have accepted, that this is the reality based on, like you said earlier, what everybody agrees to. That doesn't mean it's natural. That doesn't mean it's normal. It just means it's cultural. It just means that we have now adapted to this. For instance, my parents are from the Caribbean. It is cultural to eat hot food with Scotch bonnet pepper. That doesn't mean if I come, you understand? So we have grown to an acquired taste. If you're going to eat some jerk or whatever the case may be, you're going to put a lot of pepper on it. It's going to burn up your mouth. You go somewhere else, it might not be in that culture. So just because it's culture doesn't mean it's natural, normal, or doesn't mean it's healthy either. So I wanted to submit that as well, that culture in itself. We had a lot of things in our Hebrew Israelite culture that got us to where we are today, scattered to the four corners of the earth. So I personally do not submit to everything that was in the Torah that was culture. It was cultural to serve the Most High and the Baalim. You understand what I'm saying? It was cultural to do a lot of the things that we were doing that actually broke Torah. So Torah, which is universal principles that govern creation, you understand, and culture are two different things. And I wanted to say that I do agree that what we're doing today is smushing without even understanding any of the other stuff. And not taking a look how it works. I know there's a lot of, like I say, media that the Nigerians, the Ghanaians, and those people who have their hand on their own camera and their own pen and they write their own stories, you can use that as a cultural analysis so that you can understand, okay, wow, this is what it looks off the paper. I'm the type of person who has to see it in working action. This is what it looks like off the paper. Like I said, you can look at certain documentary and things that is done. One in particular named My Four Wives. That's one coming out of Iran. The Hebrew Israelites out of Emunah did one that's called Sister Wife. They have some out of England as well. So like I said, I've compiled a good list of documentaries that give you a working understanding of what this looks like in other places. And I'll say this, when I did one of those videos and put it on YouTube, some Islamics, so sometimes they think I'm Islamic, I don't know why, but they contacted me and asked me, can you make a comment? And this is a real site, and you can go there right now. It's called sisterwife.com. No, secondwife.com, I think it's called, right? And when you look on this website, they said, can you look over this website and give us a comment of what you think? And when I began to look over the website to see that they actually put up a website if you wanted to mail order a second wife. So I hop over to the question and answer period so that I can see, because Islam is a place where you have the imam, you have the person who you can go to. The questions and concerns that came out of this level of a relationship were so complex. I'm like, what in the world? Because it gets down to the nitty-gritty, because like Brother LeBron said, you're really dealing with some real serious stuff. And if you don't know what you're doing, little things such as jealousy, envy, and all of these things, when they creep in, they can not only destroy that relationship, they can destroy the foundation of which the children stand on. Another one is lifting the veil of Mormonism. If you want to look about polygamy with Joseph Smith, if I'm not mistaken, his name, who in his assertion said that he got visited by a malak who told him where to go find these things, and that polygamy had to be in their religion. And it was necessary. The Mormons believe it was necessary for man to become a god. You understand what I'm saying? So you can look into these different cultures and compare and contrast what is happening, what are the effects, what are the downfalls, because human nature is human nature, and outside law can only govern human nature to a certain extent. People within themselves have to elevate to a level, but they cannot be forced, because once they're forced, when that force is no longer there, they're going to go the other way anyway. And so I just wanted to say that for anyone out there who does want to do the real-time work, there are plenty of resources, all of which I'm willing to share. Link me on Facebook, Twitter, all of them good stuff to say. And I will send you over the information. And I even was saying recently, I'm going to try to transcribe all that I've studied and just to where it is the people can take it and go from there and do their further studies. So I definitely agree. One has to take it off the paper and see it in action and understand that it is not just a West thing and a North thing or a South thing and an East thing. It's a human thing. And we have to return to dealing with each other in a human nature. Hallelujah.
All right, family, we only have like a few minutes left on the air. And once again, the show's archives. You can always go back and go check it out. Of course, we're going to put it on the YouTube page, and also it's going to be on iTunes in the podcast section. So make sure you go back and spread the word about polygamy, what's wrong with that. Once again, I want to thank my special guests. Again, people, there's a lot of people listening to the show. If you have any quick comments you want to mention before we sign off, again, the number is 646-716-7320. You can press number 1 and we'll add you in the conversation, or forever hold your peace. And I'm glad that you enjoyed the show. We appreciate you guys. But any last words you want to share with the people on Divine Prospect? You can go ahead.
Not really. I think we covered most of that needs to, most of the stuff to get people thinking or get the gears going and reevaluating this subject matter in regards to polygamy and more specifically polygyny. Again, we have to fully understand culture. And that is the most important thing, and not just your culture, but comparative cultures, all right, and know how to properly employ whatever culture you're subscribing to in the reality that you're living. You cannot just take something in theory, something ideally, and then think you can employ it and get the results, okay? You have the difference between in vitro and in vivo. In vitro is a term where you have a lab where they do tests and experiments, and it works in the lab. But in vivo, in reality, it doesn't work because there's other variables that affect it. So we have to look at how, if we're going to extract a particular principle, precept, cultural edict, and how can we properly employ it, being in the current situations and circumstances that we are in today. I think that Emunah Yisrael, she did an excellent job voicing her perspective on this subject matter. I learned a lot from what she said on today. I had a presentation, but I'm glad I got most of the information out there so people can go back and research. And I think LaRon also made a great point. And this is something that needs to be spoken more. I think this is a taboo subject, and a lot of people don't really go into detail about it because they assume that they understand what it's about. But we have to remove that taboo tag off of this subject matter. It needs to be openly discussed. People need to be openly aware of the consequences, the pros and cons. And with that, people will be properly equipped in order to decide whether or not this is a particular job that they're equipped to tackle or take on. And with that being said, I bow out. It was an honor to be on the show. I thank Sal for inviting me and being able to give my feedback on it. I have to thank the sister, our co-team, Emunah, for her input. It was excellent. And I look forward to more of the discussion happening in households around the world once this thing becomes live and archived so that people can actually listen back on it themselves.
Yeah, once again, Ron Divine Prospect, that's a busy brother right there, man. So I definitely appreciate you making time to come on Debate Talk for you. And what I'm going to do is, I want to definitely hear the rest of the information, your presentation. So we're going to get you back on the air. I got some time in January, some openings. Hopefully we can, put you on the schedule, and you can give forth a Bible lesson on polygamy if you have time. But just get back to me and let me know, when you have some time so we can make it happen. But Emunah, Sister Emunah, any last words you want to share with the people out there? Go ahead.
Can indeed. I want to say again, thank you for having me on, Brother Sal. Again, very interesting topic. It's a good conversation and discourse. First time I'm meeting Divine Prospect, so bless up yourself, Divine Prospect. Good to meet you. To the listeners out there, sometimes it's a hot topic, and sometimes we need to simmer in the pot and just let it, resonate in our mind and our heart and really get what we need to get. I agree. We need to do more study. We need to lift the veil on this situation because relationships are at the base of our nation. And if the relationship is eroded, if the relationship is compromised, if the individuals in the relationship is compromised, no matter how much we know, you understand what I'm saying? We will not be able to get beyond the way in which we relate one to another. So there needs to be a respect that is returned or brought back into the nation, not only to the Creator, but the man and the woman's relationship. And the God, and this was the first relationship that was compromised as it is on a human level. That man and that woman, the masculine energy needs to be balanced. You understand? Everybody has a role. When we say that one is going to be greater and one is lesser or one is not as important, what we do is invalidate what the Most High has made. So I just thank everybody for giving us the ear. Like you said, I pray that we listen back to this stuff and take the time. Because like the brother said, the wrong decision that we make in this area can affect our entire life. You understand what I'm saying? And so it behooves us, like our father Abraham said, man, go all the way over there. And a brother did a lesson on it. It wasn't a short distance that the servant went to go try to find another Isha, not another one, the right one. And we see he made a prayer, and he made it specific because the right woman will be health to your bones, but the wrong one is cancerous. The wrong one will pull you down. The wrong one will hurt you. Likewise, the wrong man will suppress you. He will imprison you, and thereby your children will not be able to go in the way that the Most High prescribed. So this is a very important topic around the world culturally, marriage, birth, and death. You understand? You can't really pick when you're going to be born. You can't really pick when you die. But marriage is something that we need to put more time, more energy, more effort, and really hone in on it so that we can build these strong family units and return as Yisrael. So all praise be to the Most High, the Holy One. Thank you for having me on, and it has been a blessed show.